So let's talk about how to future-proof organizations by optimizing the three invisible forces. What does it mean exactly? Well, probably you had this expression on your face when you're talking to people sometimes, when you think that, oh my God, that person has no common sense at all. They just don't get me, and you have no idea what's going on. But probably they feel the same way about you, but for different reason. And we noticed that, for example, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'm pretty sure that most of you know this proverb. And it sounds really good on the surface level. But is that really true? Because if you're in the wrong team, the wrong group, it's better to be alone, to be honest. So it's not automatic. And this post went viral on LinkedIn. We had more than 1 million views and thousands of people shared it because it hit a nerve. That you have a lot of smart people in the team, but somehow a lot of potential is lost. You have a few loud people who seem to be confident and competent, but that's not exactly true. And I'm going to show you the business case for it. And it's easy to jump to the conclusion, oh, it's those introverts, they're too quiet. No, there's much more to it. That's why we have to understand team dynamics. People are unhappy at work, and I'm going to show you exactly how many and why. So we all have this North Star, a goal we are aiming for. We have something we want to achieve, and let's call it growth, because, if you have a business, probably you want to grow. If you don't, maybe that's not a business. So that is objective. But if you want to plan the future, you want to plan a journey, the starting point has to be accurate. So where do we start? So we can plan it. Well, 80% of employees think that the managers are not needed. And that is a problem, because 70% of employee engagement depends on the leader. So if they don't believe in them, why would they be engaged? To make it a bit more interesting, most of the employees don't believe that their leaders are ready to lead them into the future. So why would they put the work into it? At the end of the day, we don't know what the future holds, but we kind of understand the trends that shape it. So if you look at their research, by 2030, 85% of the jobs that will exist haven't been invented yet. The world is not like it used to be. The future is changing rapidly. So what can we do about this? But there's more to it, because at the same time, there's going to be a global talent shortage of 85 million people. So you have less people, and that translates into $8.5 trillion lost in revenue. So we are not sure what's happening, but we know what's going on right now. So today we are going to talk about what is the one most important ingredient of growth. Knowing that, what are the two barriers to making it happen? What are these three invisible forces that make or break a team? And what do they have to do with the 4 stages of growth or decline? And why is it important to find out where we are as a team? So Jacob Morgan asked a really practical question. He asked 140 top CEOs and 14,000 employees what we should be teaching leaders now to prepare for the future. He got back all the answers, he published The Future Leader, and he came up with 4 mindsets and 5 skills, and I changed the names a little bit based on his own description to make them a bit more understandable. And that was growth mindset, teamwork, inclusion, and global mindset. In terms of skills, coaching, innovation, communication, self-awareness, and also technology. As you can see, 8 out of the 9 skills and mindsets are directly linked to how much you understand yourself and others. People skills are not soft, they are not optional, they are hardcore business skills. That's what we need to understand. Yet, a lot of companies focus on technology. Soft skills are soft because you cannot see them, you cannot measure them. Technology, that is something that we can understand, so let's focus on that. But that's not the solution. That's not how you future-proof your company. So if I know that we need that, we need people skills, how come we cannot make it happen? What's happening? So the first barrier is common sense. This is what we demand, this is what we like, and we love when people have common sense because they think like us. Just remember the last time you had this kind of feeling as a customer, that you were so impressed. Then probably you were served by someone who understood what you expected, so they could exceed your expectations. Now, most people focus on the golden rule. treat people the way you want to be treated, and that's how they impress you. Good intention, but the impact, not so much. Because if you look at research, 60 to 80% of all issues in a company happen for 3 reasons: clash of values, clash of personalities, and poor leadership. 60 to 80, almost all of them. And they all stem from the same source: the lack of understanding of why people think and behave differently. So it makes sense to focus on that. And because people rely on good intention and common sense, it creates a really expensive mindset gap. For example, 86% of leaders see themselves as inspiring, really confident people. But according to a McKinsey report, 82% of employees think they're not. It doesn't mean that they are bad people or bad leaders. They are just not aware of this topic, and it impacts them. Or 80% of CEOs believe that their customer service is outstanding. Do you think that the customers agree with them? Salesforce has the data. No, really. Only 8% of customers agree with them. How much money is lost there? How much potential is lost there? When people don't feel valued and understood, then they go somewhere else. They have plenty of options. The second barrier is outdated and incomplete solutions. Let's be honest, the world completely changed. It is changing because the human knowledge doubles every 12 hours. It's insanely quick. We cannot keep up with this. The nature of the work is changing as well. It's much more service-based. It's much more collaborative. And then let's be honest, you can work from anywhere. The workplace is more blended and hybrid, more diverse, and also now they are expecting inclusion as well. Plus, people have options. So at the moment, we have 2 epic imperatives. We have to win the workplace and we have to win the market. And for both, we have to go back to the basics. Understand ourselves and others. We have to make them feel valued and understood. And it's not that easy, but there is a blueprint. Now, the issue is that most of the leadership and management models that we are using today were created by people who were born just after the American Civil War in the 19th century. It's not a joke. Look it up. The world completely changed. New challenges require new solutions. Most of those models were created before 1975, when less than 17% of the value was created by humans. They were seen as a cost to contain. Today, that value is more than 90%. But we are using the same tools. That makes no sense. It's almost like trying to fix a smart TV with tools designed for black and white ones. Yes, you can try it harder, but that's not going to help you. And it's not just a theory. Look at the employee engagement trend for the last 22 years in the US. It's one thing that the numbers are not improving. They are going downhill. They are getting worse, despite companies spending a fortune on the same solutions. That's the definition of insanity. Just because something is familiar and popular, it doesn't mean that it is still the best practice. It doesn't mean that it works. So sometimes we have to zoom out a little bit, and then we can see if it makes sense or it doesn't. But there's more to it, because often, especially in big companies, everything is disconnected. So this is a typical conversation within a big company. Maybe it's a bit of a caricature, but we all have our favorite tools and frameworks. And then we can introduce ourselves. Fantastic. Now we can speak different languages. Companies spend a lot of money on different solutions, but it's like speaking different languages. You can try it harder. It doesn't mean that you understand each other. There is no one platform, one operating system, and many applications. So this is something that we need to look into, because a lot of money and potential is lost because of that. It's not the lack of budget. It's not the lack of money. It's outdated and incomplete solutions. And to be honest, I was part of the statistics. You look at this good-looking guy, that's me with my brother, and that's exactly where I am now. And because I had no idea what to do, I studied languages. I've got a master's in Italian linguistics, specializing in proverbs. So you can imagine the amount of life skills and transferable skills I took to the UK more than 20 years ago. Pretty much nothing. But the point is that my second master's there was more useful. I specialized in Eastern and Western European joint ventures. And my research showed that the gap between the two generations in Hungary was much bigger than the gap between the new generations and the Western Europeans, which technically contradicted everything we learned about, that culture is country-specific and stable. That's not true. At least my data showed that. But who are you to question the big boys? Academics, they've been around for 40, 50 years. It's not polite. I got a good grade. And then I started my own company, which was a restaurant booking site. You book a table, we get the money, but obviously it was more exciting than that. So we started with 35 restaurants in Brighton, and in 1 year we had 5,500 all over the UK, and it turned into a joint venture with a software company. And on paper, everything made a lot of sense. But in real life, not really. I couldn't work with the other CEO who was French. I'm not saying that was the main problem, but definitely it didn't work out. It wasn't pretty at all. We had to get out of the business. We sold the shares, and that's when I started my research. I didn't understand how come that was the exact topic of my dissertation. The department where I studied is #1 in the world in its category. I had years of experience. How come I couldn't put that theory into practice? It didn't make any sense. So I got certified in a lot of different things, and I wanted to work with the people who created the intercultural field, psychometric, and leadership field. My theory was, my assumption, that if all of those models are or were correct, there must be a huge overlapping part. There must be a blueprint of why people think and behave differently. And it turned out that there is. And this webinar is about those insights. It's not about convincing you. It's about sharing those mistakes and a fair amount of success as well. It's not just a good idea. It's available in 46 countries. We have more than 200 licensed partners, and we work with a lot of big companies and universities. It's innovative, but it's also proven. So this one sentence sums up everything that we do, that creating a visibly diverse group is relatively easy. Turning it into a high-performing team is challenging. And a lot of potential clients don't even know what the difference is. But before we do that, let me ask you a question. Do you feel that you're a statistically average, normal individual of the country where you grew up? There are two options. Yes, I'm like a fish in water. Not really, but I know how to act like one. So I'm going to launch a poll, and I'm really curious about your answer. It's anonymous. How average, how normal are you? Such a nasty question, but it's also a practical one. How do you feel? Maybe it's 73% of the people. Do we have more? 75? 78? Anyone else? We're up to 82. Don't be left out. 85? Closing? Ending. One more? That's it. So 78% of the people said, no, I'm not, but I know how to act like one. 78%, which is interesting. So most of you are not average at all. But let's talk about the Air Force. Top Gun, good-looking guy. But the reason I'm using him, because there's a really interesting case study. In the 1950s, the American Air Force had a big problem. The pilots didn't perform. Luckily, they had some scientists. And they realized, we know what the problem is. Because the cockpit was designed for the average pilot in the 1930s. In the 1950s, they were bigger. Obviously, we have to create the perfect cockpit for the average pilot in the 1950s. So they invited more than 4,000 pilots. They measured them on a lot of different dimensions. Ultimately, they chose 10, and then they created the perfect cockpit. Do you know what happened? Nothing. No improvement. They just wasted the money because they expected most of the people to fall within this 30% range. Do you know how many people were there? I can tell you exactly. 0. There was not one pilot who was within this range on all the 10 dimensions. Even when they reduced it to 3 dimensions, it was less than 5%. There's no average person. So often numbers look scientific, but how practical they are, that's a completely different story. And we can see the same issue in the intercultural field. Because when you mention the word culture, this is what you think about, at least most people, the 5 do's and don'ts in different countries, the statistically average values and beliefs. Fantastic. Yes, it makes sense to learn about what people are used to. But if you look at up-to-date research, more than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them. We all belong to 15 or 20 culture groups at the same time. And the poorest container of culture is country of origin, gender, and generation. Meaning that based on these categories, you cannot predict an individual's values and beliefs. That has nothing to do with science. Yet, how many people claim that? And you are also the proof. You just said it, 78% of you think that you're not average. But we think that other people are, obviously. I'm special, but they must be average. So for global mobility, it makes sense. Learn about what's normal. But if your success depends on how well you understand an individual in front of you, if that is your client, your employee, your boss, or even your partner, even horoscope is more useful. It's not a joke. Look it up. So the point is that you cannot create a high-performing team based on passports. Culture is not who we are. It's what we are used to. So when we simplify things so much, then people can get really confident so they can make bigger mistakes more quickly. And that's not ideal. So I'm not criticizing any tools. Don't get me wrong. Every tool was designed for a specific purpose. The problem is when people misunderstand them or misuse them, or the providers claim something that is not true. They promise more than they can deliver, or more than the models were designed for. That's the issue. Because then the clients pay for it twice. First in cash, and the second time in lost opportunity. And that is unfair. And that is the main reason why I do this webinar every single month. So when it comes to the invisible forces, the first one is cognitive diversity. It's the least popular one, probably. But this is the immune system of a team. This is the only layer that has proven benefit in terms of performance, the way people think, the way they process information. Because imagine that you have a really complicated issue at hand. You have a great leader called Tom, and he employs really smart people, but he doesn't know about this topic. So he employs really smart people who think the same way. This is called homophilic diversity. We like and trust people who are similar to us. Lots of people claim that I love diversity. Yes, you do, but your brain doesn't, because it means unpredictability. And that is the last thing that the brain wants. And once I understand it, we also know what to do. This is completely normal. So a team can be individually really smart, but collectively blind. And this is not just a theory. We have plenty of case studies. That was 10 senior leaders from 8 different countries. Seemingly really diverse. Deep inside, cognitive diversity was 22%, meaning that if you look at the sliding scales as a range of perspectives, all the 10 people were within this range. But you know what? Why would you employ somebody who disagrees with you, who has a different pace, a different background? You don't need that hassle. I mean, your work is stressful enough. Why would you employ somebody who annoys you? And then we end up with people like us. So imagine that you have a problem or opportunity here in the middle, and then everybody is standing here. Can you make the best decision? It's likely that they would agree. It feels good. It doesn't make it true because they have a huge blind spot. That was another case study. 1 leader and 4 new employees, and they were really proud of their diversity. And they should be. But when we looked inside on the cognitive level, 42%, they were not that different. And when we compared the leader with the team average, it turned out that he managed to attract people like himself from all over the world. Of course, they hit it off. It's very easy to be inclusive towards people like you. But when they're different, it's a bit more difficult. That's another case study. big German company, they employed a lot of Brazilian engineers. So of course, we can point out the statistically average national differences to widen the gap. But when they completed the assessments, it turned out that the Brazilian engineers were much more German inside than most Germans. And that was like a psychological permission for them. Of course, they have to learn how to buy a bus ticket. But on a cognitive level, it was the right environment in terms of country and even profession. They left Brazil because it was too messy and disorganized for them. So let's focus on data. Let's deal with facts. Let's build a common ground first, where we can learn how to make the most of the differences. That makes more sense. But if you need more comforting lies, here's another one. Men and women are so different, as if they were from a different planet. So obviously, it's not your fault that you don't understand them. But again, that's not true. We had a boot camp, like an open course. We put all the women and men in one group and we compared them. As you can see, there was no huge difference at all. Then we tried the same thing with millennials and baby boomers. Again, not a huge gap. Often just the expectations are different, nothing else. So going back to cognitive diversity, Tom is still the boss. Now he knows about the topic, so he employs smart people who think differently. Is it good for the business? No, really. That is just the potential for success or disaster. That just means that you have a bunch of people who think and behave differently. Can you make it work? That's a different story. That can be your greatest asset or liability. But that's also an option that Tom is not a great boss because he's way too dominant. Whatever he says goes. So people quickly learn there's no point in bringing up ideas. Just conform to the norms, and that's how you lose the power of diversity, and that's how people burn out. And I'm pretty sure that you experience this kind of dynamics as an employee or as a trainer. But how much potential is lost? This is the question that the Three Circle partners asked the teams. They wanted to quantify it because you feel it, but the idea is that you put really smart people in a team hoping to create synergy. But in real life, that's not what happens. So they gave an individual assessment to each member of the team. They scored them individually, and then they had to submit one collectively. What you see here, the blue number, that is the team result, and the green one is the best possible individual score. That was a huge gap. So technically, they had the right answer, but it didn't make it to the collective one. So they repeated it hundreds of times, and the average gap was 79%. That's how much potential is lost in a team because of the interaction gap. 90% of business is interaction between people who think and behave differently. It is that different. So if you look at this number, this 80-90%, it keeps coming back in completely different researches. It is that important. So when you take an assessment, we learn about our preference, and statistically, most people have 5 to 10% flexibility. That's the comfort zone. That is what the brain loves. It wants to keep you efficient and safe. And of course, that happens in the comfort zone. But if you look at the sliding scale as a range of communication styles, and you have to interact with someone on the other side of the spectrum, it's going to be very stressful. It's going to be draining. Or you just react instead of responding. In both cases, probably you don't get the best outcome. What can we do? Can we change your preferences? Of course, but there's no point. What we want instead is to expand your comfort zone. So instead of using psychometric assessment as an excuse, no, that is a starting point. Now we can actively and intentionally work on our comfort zone, behavioral flexibility, and cognitive flexibility. Because if something is rigid, it breaks. But there's more to it, because even a company has a corporate comfort zone. That is the behavior that is expected and rewarded. You can push the boundaries, maybe it's accepted, tolerated, and the rest is punished. And this is the most important part. How big is the gap between what's natural to you and what is normal and expected around you? How much do you have to pretend in order to be accepted? That is really stressful. And this can be your own family. It can be your own country, gender, generation. Just like you said, 80% of you are not statistically average. Now, of course, it depends on the mindset gap, how big that is. But the bigger it is, the more painful it can be. And sometimes just people feel that something is wrong with them. And that's not the case. They're just not aware of this topic. The second invisible force, psychological safety. Very popular model and concept. Everybody talks about it. They post a lot. But when you ask them how they actually measure it, there is silence or anger. But it's not a new topic, let's be honest. It started a long time ago. In 1788, there was the Chimney Sweepers Act as a response to some outrage in the UK, because the limit to be a chimney sweeper apprentice was 4 years old. So imagine 4 years old babies on the roof, and people got really upset. So they had to regulate it. And it took probably 250 years, but they created a system around physical safety. So they introduced the hazard categories. And now this framework is available in almost all the countries. But recently they added a fifth category, the psychosocial one, psychological safety, because often an attack on your psychological safety can cause more harm than a slap in the face. But because it's invisible, then it's more difficult to regulate it. When it comes to physical safety, you know what is accepted, what is illegal, what is frowned upon. When it comes to psychological safety, that's a different story. But it's also important for business, because that is the #1 trait of high-performing teams. It's proven beyond doubt. You score high on this, you make a lot of money. You score low, you have issues, big ones. That's not ideal. But sometimes people talk about growth mindset almost as a synonym to psychological safety. Or they might even say that, you know what, growth mindset is even more important. Fantastic. It's great if you have it. But how much you can improve it and how much you can develop it, that's a very different story. One of the biggest case studies was this one, National Study of Learning Mindset. 12,000 students, 65 different schools. So they could measure everything. They trained the teachers, they had online courses, and they had gradings, so they could see how much everything changed. Do you know what happened? To be honest, not much. There was a tiny segment where there was a tiny improvement. First of all, less people reported that they have fixed mindset, now knowing what that was. And also, the struggling students improved a little bit. But what was interesting is that even if somebody had a growth mindset as an individual, if the environment didn't have it, there was no improvement at all. And that is the real question. So when you see improvement, is that the result of growth mindset? Or that's the result of a psychologically safe environment? Because that would make more sense. So it's nice to talk about growth mindset, but is that the solution? If you have it, run with it. But growth mindset without psychological safety is like trying to swim without water. It's not the right environment. It doesn't matter how much you think about it or how hard you try. That's the right environment. We need that. The third invisible force, motivation, because let's be honest, a business is not a family. You're not going to put your kids on furlough if they are lazy. So we need people who step up, who are motivated. So we need the desire to learn, contribute, and get things done. And one of the most up-to-date research in this field comes from Daniel Pink. He talks about the evolution of motivation. The basic one, 1.0 biological, survive and make babies. That's enough. Or it was enough for a while. But then we needed more. We had to upgrade it to motivation 2.0, the extrinsic one, the external ones, the pain and pleasure, the carrot and the stick principle. But the problem is that we can get used to everything. So you have to punish and reward people more and more to get the same results. And when it comes to creativity and strategy, it doesn't work. That's what the research shows. So we had to upgrade it to motivation 3.0, the intrinsic ones. These are the ones that are coming from inside. You do it for the sake of it, for the process, because you love it. It's internal, it's real, it's sustainable. We have to tap into that. But you can only do that if you know the person, Because like Chris Voss said, the FBI negotiator, there's no such thing as logical, only what matters to people. So once you understand what people want and what they want to avoid, then you can bridge this mindset gap because you make them feel valued and understood. There is no shortcut. And it's not based on common sense and good intention. It requires effort and some kind of studies. Most people wouldn't trust a surgeon without a proper monitoring equipment and up-to-date expertise, but they are willing to risk their business because of coaches and consultants without those. I know that this sentence sounds horrible, but this is real life most of the time. How do you measure something? So you have smart people. How do you know that they feel safe and motivated enough to collaborate and contribute? Because training providers would promise anything, but how do you measure progress? Where is the transparency? So this is something that we need to focus on, because fixing the bucket might not be the sexiest solution, because everybody wants to focus on my strengths, my superpower. Yes, but a lot of potential is lost because of misunderstandings. Because under pressure, we just revert back to our natural state. We want to hang out with people like us because that is safer. Then the biases kick in, all the derailers. So let's learn how to fix the bucket first. Because we can get really good at trying to fill it up, but you can achieve much more by fixing some of the holes at least. So when you have a team, we can ask them to take an assessment and we can learn about the results. So we can see that as a team, if they score high on psychological safety and motivation, they are in the growth zone. That's great. But we also know that averages can lie. Numbers can hide the truth. So when you look at the numbers, we can see immediately 64% and 66%. So you quantify it, it becomes real, it becomes tangible. But I can also see the tension score. That shows how polarized a team is. And I'm not talking about creative tension. No. And I'm going to show you why. Because as an average, this team is fantastic. But if you look at the individuals, not so much. Because some people feel much more safe and motivated than others. So obviously, what's the first instinct? Who are these people? Doesn't matter. I mean, that's not the point. We just have to find out why some people feel like that, so we can address those root causes. Because even if you have one or two outliers, they can affect performance by 30 or 40%. And let's be honest, there is no assessment that could tell you exactly that this is your problem. At least I don't think so. So we are not claiming that. But we know where the problem is, and we know how serious it is. So we can break down psychological safety and motivational drivers into 4 subcategories each. That's 8 altogether. So when we visualize the results, then we can create meaningful conversations driven by data and rooted in science. Because we have the data, but the people have the insights. And when we combine both, then we can find a solution. We can co-create the next step. But we can also measure the progress. This can be 2 teams, or it can be the same team with 3 months difference. The darker one, that is the current result, and then the lighter one is the previous one. We can see how psychological safety changed. The tension score improved, or it didn't. Motivation. Then we can break it down. So what's happening? Where should we focus on? It doesn't get more practical than that. Of course, not everything depends on your intervention, because anything can happen in the meantime, but we know where we have to focus. And then we can also create these meaningful conversations. Why did the score lower? Why the tension score is higher? What happened in the meantime? So we can discuss it, because we have the data, but they have the insights. But it's very difficult to talk about something you're not aware of. So we need to give people a frame of reference and data to facilitate that conversation. Otherwise, it's difficult to reflect on something that we don't know about. It's very difficult to optimize something if we don't know how it works and we cannot measure it. So we talked about the most important ingredient of growth. How much you understand yourself and others. We know about the two main barriers, and we discussed the three invisible forces. Why was this important? I'll show you. Because the highest level of growth happens in a psychologically safe, motivating, and cognitively diverse environment. That is stage one, when you score high on all the three invisible forces. This is where magic happens. For example, Netflix. They started in '97. They had to pivot because renting out DVDs wasn't the best idea, but they were really intentional. They wanted the best of the best. They paid them more. They were innovative, and they are growing really quickly. But stage two is called time bomb. Why is it time bomb? Because if you have it, that's not good. You find it, you can diffuse it. If you cannot find it, well, then it's going to explode and it causes damage. So that happens when you have a problem with one of the invisible forces. If you are lacking cognitive diversity, then it gives you a tunnel vision, a huge blind spot. If there's no motivation, that leads to stagnation. And if there's no safety, that leads to burnout, and it creates anxiety. That's not good for anyone. And Volkswagen knows that. In 2010 or 15, they had the Dieselgate, when they implemented the defeat devices in the US, cheating, so they could pass the emission test. And that was not one mistake. Everybody knew that, but nobody wanted to speak up, or they just couldn't. And they lost a lot of money. They even had to sack the CEO because they didn't apologize. It was not one mistake, but the lack of psychological safety. But when you get to stage 3, decline, that's not pretty. This is when you have a problem with two of the invisible forces. If you have only motivation, that leads to a rat race. Push, push, push. Fantastic. And if you have only psychological safety, nothing else, that leads to dissolution, usually. And if you have only cognitive diversity, well, that's very confusing. That leads to chaos. And size is not a guarantee for anything. Kodak used to be huge. In '67, they had 80% of the market. They were comfortable. But when in '75, digital camera was invented by one of their employees, the employee got shut down. They said, don't be ridiculous. So Fuji took it on, and they made a lot of money. And by the time Kodak woke up, it was too late. Size is not a guarantee. They thought that, oh, our customers are loyal. No, they were not. They went for quality and for lower prices. And then stage 4, game over. It's kind of self-explanatory. This is when you have a problem with all the three invisible forces. That's game over. Blockbuster is a wonderful topic because they were huge, big ones. And when in 2000 Netflix approached them, they wanted a partnership, they laughed at them. But the idea was that Blockbuster could promote Netflix in their stores, and Netflix could do the online stuff. And they said, don't be silly, you're a little startup. But in 2004, the Blockbuster realized that that's actually a competition. We are in trouble. At that point, they had two options. They could have canceled the late fees, but that would have cost $200 million. No, we are greedy, we keep it. Option 2, we could build a digital platform. The price would have been the same. Dismissed it. Indeed, they sacked the CEO because he was rocking the boat too much. Blockbuster is gone. Size is not a guarantee for anything. And Netflix is Fortune 115 or 117 right now. So here's the real question. How can you make the best decision? Do you make a decision based on information or hunch? You guessing or you measuring? Where is your team? Is it in stage 1, growth? Maybe tunnel vision or going down, rat race, or maybe almost game over. How do you make the best decision? We're not guessing. We need to measure these things. So data without stories are powerless. They mean nothing. But stories without data are just noise. They can be entertaining. But when you combine stories with data and insights, then it increases engagement. Then magic happens. Not before that. You need both. And this is exactly what we want to achieve. This is what the ICP solutions are. This is something that I was working on today because this is such a typical situation. You meet coaches, consultants, HR people, and then you ask them about the story. What do they do? Well, I'm passionate about psychological safety and team coaching. We are the go-to experts. And you know these people, they post every day how important these things are. And then you tell them about, fantastic. Do you also measure it? Do you bring more science than passion? More science than anger to this field? Do you measure the progress? Do you provide transparency to your clients? Do you know about the other invisible forces that make or break a team? And it's not my theory. Anybody can look it up. Then no. I mean, that's the polite no. And this is sometimes surprising, that they are the experts who cannot measure something. And I'm not doubting their passion, but how do you do that? How do you optimize something that you cannot measure? Why are you running away when your performance could be measured against what you promise? And it happens even with big companies. Preaching about something is great, but as soon as you have to be accountable, no. And that's not credible. And that is the main reason why I do this webinar. So you can go back to your current provider, you can ask better questions, and you can make better decisions for yourself. And that is the goal. Because a lot of companies would promise anything just to make a sale. Personally, I would promise less and deliver more. So to be honest, this is what we do. And I think there's a huge gap in the market, and that is data-driven team coaching, team development. And it takes 4 steps. First, you have to measure it. Then you visualize it. Because if it's invisible, people don't take it seriously. It's just some voodoo stuff. But as soon as you can quantify it, they can hold it in their hand, it becomes real. And then we can work on optimizing it together. And that leads to growth. There is no shortcut. Of course, if you're asking for a workshop, they're going to sell it to you. But you're not going to the doctor and you just ask for medicine. You're not going to get it. So measure what matters. Guessing is not an option. And if you want to be part of the community, an awesome community that is committed to leveling up and providing the latest, most up-to-date solution in this field, then you can join us in September. If you need more details, then reach out to Kasha or me. I'm going to put my email address in the chat as well. If you need a short summary, let me know. That's not a problem. I can send you some of the slides because I know that it's too much sometimes. But it's an important topic. And to me, it's even more personal. Because, it's more than a job. What makes a good life? I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but this was one of the longest case studies. They wanted to understand what makes people happy. What is the secret of good life? And there's a TED talk about this. And the result was that the quality of your life is in direct proportion with the quality of your relationship with yourself and others. It's not optional. And a lot of people are struggling with the first one, the relationship with ourselves. And we have to focus on that.